Reading Passage 1. You should spend about 20 minutes on questions 1 to 13, which are based on Reading Passage 1 below. Raising the Mary Rose. How a 16th century warship was recovered from the seabed. On the 19th of July 1545, English and French fleets were engaged in a sea battle off the coast of southern England in the area of water called the Solent, between Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight. Among the English vessels was a warship by the name of Mary Rose. Built in Portsmouth some 35 years earlier, she had had a long and successful fighting career, and was a favourite of King Henry VIII. Accounts of what happened to the ship vary. While witnesses agree that she was not hit by the French, some maintain that she was outdated, overladen, and sailing too low in the water, others that she was mishandled by undisciplined crew. What is undisputed, however, is that the Mary Rose sank into the Solent that day, taking at least 500 men with her. After the battle, attempts were made to recover the ship, but these failed. The Mary Rose came to rest on the seabed, lying on her starboard, right, side at an angle of approximately 60 degrees. The hull, the body of the ship, acted as a trap for the sand and mud carried by Solent currents. As a result, the starboard side filled rapidly, leaving the exposed port, left, side to be eroded by marine organisms and mechanical degradation. Because of the way the ship sank, nearly all of the starboard half survived intact. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the entire site became covered with a layer of hard grey clay, which minimized further erosion. Then, on the 16th of June 1836, some fishermen in the Solent found that their equipment was caught on an underwater obstruction, which turned out to be the Mary Rose. Diver John Deane happened to be exploring another sunken ship nearby, and the fishermen approached him, asking him to free their gear. Deane dived down, and found the equipment caught on a timber protruding slightly from the seabed. Exploring further, he uncovered several other timbers and a bronze gun. Deane continued diving on the site intermittently until 1840, recovering several more guns, 2 bows, various timbers, part of a pump and various other small finds. The Mary Rose then faded into obscurity for another 100 years. But in 1965, military historian and amateur diver Alexander McKee, in conjunction with the British Sub-Aqua Club, initiated a project called Solent Ships. While on paper this was a plan to examine a number of known wrecks in the Solent, what McKee 41. Test 2 really hoped for was to find the Mary Rose. Ordinary search techniques proved unsatisfactory, so McKee entered into collaboration with Harold E. Edgerton, professor of electrical engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In 1967, Edgerton's side-scan sonar systems revealed a large, unusually shaped object, which McKee believed was the Mary Rose. Further excavations revealed stray pieces of timber and an iron gun. But the climax to the operation came when, on the 5th of May 1971, part of the ship's frame was uncovered. McKee and his team now knew for certain that they had found the wreck, but were as yet unaware that it also housed a treasure trove of beautifully preserved artifacts. Interest in the project grew. And in 1979, the Mary Rose Trust was formed, with Prince Charles as its president and Dr. Margaret Rule its archaeological director. The decision whether or not to salvage the wreck was not an easy one, although an excavation in 1978 had shown that it might be possible to raise the hull. While the original aim was to raise the hull if at all feasible, the operation was not given the go-ahead until January 1982, when all the necessary information was available. An important factor in trying to salvage the Mary Rose was that the remaining 42 hull was an open shell. This led to an important decision being taken, namely to carry out the lifting operation in 3 very distinct stages. The hull was attached to a lifting frame via a network of bolts and lifting wires. The problem of the hull being sucked back downwards into the mud was overcome by using 12 hydraulic jacks. These raised it a few centimeters over a period of several days, as the lifting frame rose slowly up its 4 legs. It was only when the hull was hanging freely from the lifting frame, clear of the seabed and the suction effect of the surrounding mud, that the salvage operation progressed to the second stage. In this stage, the lifting frame was fixed to a hook attached to a crane, and the hull was lifted completely clear of the seabed and transferred underwater into the lifting cradle. This required precise positioning to locate the legs into the stabbing guides of the lifting cradle. The lifting cradle was designed to fit the hull using archaeological survey drawings, and was fitted with airbags to provide additional cushioning for the hull's delicate timber framework. The third and final stage was to lift the entire structure into the air, by which time the hull was also supported from below. Finally, on the 11th October 1982, millions of people around the world held their breath as the timber skeleton of the Mary Rose was lifted clear of the water, ready to be returned home to Portsmouth. Questions 1 to 4. What destroyed the civilization of Easter Island? Easter Island, or Rapa Nui as it is known locally, is home to several hundred ancient human statues, the moai. After this remote Pacific island was settled by the Polynesians, it remained isolated for centuries. All the energy and resources that went into the moai, some of which are 10 meters tall and weigh over 7,000 kilos, came from the island itself. Yet when Dutch explorers landed in 1722, they met a Stone Age culture. The moai were carved with stone tools, then transported for many kilometers, without the use of animals or wheels, to massive stone platforms. The identity of the moai builders was in doubt until well into the 20th century. Thor Heyerdahl, the Norwegian ethnographer and adventurer, thought the statues had been created by pre-Inca peoples from Peru. Best-selling Swiss author Erich von Daniken believed they were built by stranded extraterrestrials. Modern science, linguistic, archaeological and genetic evidence has definitively proved the moai builders were Polynesians, but not how they moved their creations. Local folklore maintains that the statues walked, while researchers have tended to assume the ancestors dragged the statues somehow, using ropes and logs. When the Europeans arrived, Rapa Nui was grassland, with only a few scrawny trees. In the 1970s and 1980s, though, researchers found pollen preserved in lake sediments, which proved the island had been covered in lush palm forests for thousands of years. Only after the Polynesians arrived did those forests disappear. U.S. scientist Jared Diamond believes that the Rapa Nui people, descendants of Polynesian settlers, wrecked their own environment. They had unfortunately settled on an extremely fragile island, dry, cool, and too remote to be properly fertilized by wind-blown volcanic ash. When the islanders cleared the forests for firewood and farming, the forests didn't grow back. As trees became scarce and they could no longer construct wooden canoes for fishing, they ate birds. Soil erosion decreased their crop yields. Before Europeans arrived, the Rapa Nui had descended into civil war and cannibalism, he maintains. The collapse of their isolated civilization, Diamond writes, is a worst-case scenario for what may lie ahead of us in our own future. See, the moai, he thinks, accelerated the self-destruction. Diamond interprets them. 46. As power displays by rival chieftains who, trapped on a remote little island, lacked other ways of asserting their dominance. They competed by building ever bigger figures. Diamond thinks they laid the moai on wooden sledges, hauled over log rails, but that required both a lot of wood and a lot of people. To feed the people, even more land had to be cleared. When the wood was gone and civil war began, the islanders began toppling the moai. By the 19th century none were standing. Reading. The archaeologists Terry Hunt of the University of Hawaii and Carl Lipo of California State University agree that Easter Island lost its lush forests and that it was an ecological catastrophe, but they believe the islanders themselves weren't to blame. And the Moai certainly weren't. Archaeological excavations indicate that the Rapa Nui went to heroic efforts to protect the resources of their wind-lashed, infertile fields. They built thousands of circular stone windbreaks and gardened inside them, and used broken volcanic rocks to keep the soil moist. In short, Hunt and Lipo argue, the prehistoric Rapa Nui were pioneers of sustainable farming. Hunt and Lipo contend that Moai building was an activity that helped keep the peace between islanders. They also believe that moving the Moai required few people and no wood, because they were walked upright. On that issue, Hunt and Lipo say, archaeological evidence backs up Rapa Nui folklore. Recent experiments indicate that as few as 18 people could, with 3 strong ropes and a bit of practice, easily maneuver a 1,000 kilograms Moai replica a few hundred meters. The figures' fat bellies tilted them forward, and a D-shaped base allowed handlers to roll and rock them side to side. Moreover, Hunt and Lipo are convinced that the settlers were not wholly responsible for the loss of the island's trees. Archaeological finds of nuts from the extinct Easter Island palm show tiny grooves, made by the teeth of Polynesian rats. The rats arrived along with the settlers, and in just a few years, Hunt and Lipo calculate, they would have overrun the island. They would have prevented the reseeding of the slow-growing palm trees and thereby doomed Rapa Nui's forest, even without the settlers' campaign of deforestation. No doubt the rats ate birds' eggs too. Hunt and Lipo also see no evidence that Rapa Nui civilization collapsed when the palm forest did. They think its population grew rapidly and then remained more or less stable until the arrival of the Europeans, who introduced deadly diseases to which islanders had no immunity. Then in the 19th century slave traders decimated the population, which shriveled to 111 people by 1877. Hunt and Lipo's vision, therefore, is one of an island populated by peaceful and ingenious Nioi builders and careful stewards of the land, rather than by reckless destroyers ruining their own environment and society. Rather than a case of abject failure, Rapa Nui is an unlikely story of success, they claim. Whichever is the case, there are surely some valuable lessons which the world at large can learn from the story of Rapa Nui. 47. Test 2. Questions 21 to 24. Complete the summary below. Choose one word only from the passage for each answer. Write your answers in boxes 21 to 24 on your answer